Hello and welcome to Jason's Macintosh Museum. I'm Jason, your host, and what we're looking at today is, I think, a very special model of Macintosh. This is the Macintosh IIfx from 1990. Now, if you had to choose one word to describe or sum up the Macintosh IIfx, it would be speed. That's what this machine is all about. It was built for speed. And in fact, when it was launched, it was the fastest model of Macintosh ever made. And to this day, in fact, it still has certain features that were never used on any other model of Macintosh. But we'll get to that in a bit more detail later on. Now, the IIfx came about because Apple wanted to deliver a very high-end workstation for people who were doing very demanding tasks, such as high-end audio, high-end video, and high-end graphics applications. And so what you got was a system that, in fact, was, I think, head and shoulders above what was available in the DOS and Windows world back in 1990. So, just to show you how far ahead of its time the IIfx was, let's think back to March of 1990 when this machine was launched and what options you had if you wanted to buy a very high-end workstation. Now, if you wanted to go with a DOS PC back in March 1990, the fastest machine you could buy was at the time the 25 megahertz Intel 486 based system. And it would have come with DOS and Windows 386 or Windows version 2 because Windows version 3 was still a few months away. And you would have had either standard VGA graphics or possibly Super VGA, maybe, with say 256 colours rather than 16 colours. Now, that was all very good and well, but compare that with what you got with the IIfx. When the IIfx was launched, it featured a Motorola 68030 CPU running at not 25, not 33, but 40 megahertz, which at the time was far and away the fastest Macintosh ever made, and it would certainly, I believe, have probably blown the doors off the 25 megahertz Intel 486 as well. And as usual, you got the 68882 numeric coprocessor along with it, also running at 40 megahertz. And that wasn't the whole story though, because with the IIfx, many other features were added to improve performance, and one of those was the memory. The IIfx used a very special type of memory, which allowed for what was known as latched read and write operations, where read and write operations to memory could overlap each other, again improving performance. And as if that wasn't enough, the IIfx also had 32 kilobytes of level 2 cache built in as well, further improving performance. And to top it all off, what you got as standard was Apple's first hardware accelerated video card, which is known as the 824GC, and that offered as a minimum 256 colours and could go up to thousands of colours, which again was far superior to what standard VGA graphics could offer. So the IIfx really was ahead of its time. And unfortunately, that is reflected in the price. There's the old saying, you get what you pay for. Well, the IIfx is no exception. The IIfx would have cost between $9,000 and $12,000 US when it was launched, depending on the configuration. So as for the specifics of the IIfx, well, as I mentioned, it came with a 40 megahertz Motorola 68030 CPU, as well as the 68882 numeric coprocessor, also running at 40 megahertz. It came with 1 megabyte of memory as standard, which was expandable up to 128 megabytes, although you had to use a special type of memory with the IIfx, which we'll talk about a bit later. It came with a 1.4 megabyte SuperDrive as standard, and came with either a 40, 80 or 120 megabyte hard disk. The IIfx was launched in March of 1990 and was discontinued in April of 1992. And during that time, it was more or less the absolute flagship Macintosh. Even though the Quadra series came out in 1991 with the Motorola 040 CPU, Apple in fact did not make another machine that equaled the 2FX's clock speed until 1993, and that was the Quadra 840 AV. And it's also worth noting that some of the code names for the 2FX while it was being developed were F16, Weed Whacker, and Wicked Fast. So I think that really sums up the machine, as in it was built for speed. So let's have a closer look at this speed demon and see what's inside. Here's the front view of the Macintosh IIfx, and you'll notice that the casing is virtually identical to that of the Macintosh 2 and the 2X. In fact, it is identical. They all share the same physical case and the same internal layout. And as a result of that, you can actually swap logic boards and other parts between the different models, if necessary. For example, often if you had a Macintosh 2, you could drop in a 2FX logic board as an easy upgrade. But let's have a look at the front, and we have the power LED on the top left. Moving over from there, we have the two internal floppy drives. In this case, they're both 1.4 megabyte SuperDrives. Then down here, we have the Apple logo and Macintosh IIfx tag. And that's about it for the front. It's just like the 2 and the 2X, a very clean, very modern design. So what we'll do is we'll have a quick look at the back. So we'll just turn this around. So here's the view of the back. So again, starting from the top, we've got one of the two latches you have to push in to remove the top cover. And then we have the serial number tag over here. And then moving across from there, we have the 6 NuBus slot covers. You can see in this case we have 2 of them occupied, one with a video card and one with a Ethernet card. Then over here we have the power supply input and also the monitor power output. And then down at the bottom we have all the various ports. Starting with, we have the power button over here. So just like the 2 and the 2X, the 2FX supported soft power. So you could power it on either from the power key on the keyboard or by pushing this button on the back panel. Then we have all the ports. We have audio out, 2 ADB ports, printer and modem ports, external SCSI, and that's it. So not much to talk about there either. So what we'll do now is we'll disassemble the 2FX and have a look at what's inside of it. Okay, well here's the Macintosh IIfx. So the first step to take it apart is to take off the top cover. And to do that, there are 2 clips, one here and one back here. And you need to push them in slightly and tip up the back cover, or the back of the top cover. And when it's free about this far, you can carefully lift the front of it up to release it. So we'll put the cover aside. So now we have the internals. Very much like the 2 and the 2X in fact. So we have the power supply here, NuBus cards here, hard drive here, and the 2 floppy drives here. So the next step will be to take the NuBus cards out. So we'll take out the video card. Let's lift that up carefully. That is the Apple 824 GC card, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I'll put that there. We have an Ethernet card here as well. We'll just carefully lift up to remove that. There we go. So that's a NuBus Ethernet card. Now what we'll do next is we'll take out the power supply. And to do that we have one screw to remove down here, and also we have a connector to unplug here. So we'll just unplug that connector and we'll take that screw out. Now the screw is removed, we can slide the power supply forwards and lift it out of the case. So there is the power supply. It's worth noting that the 2FX in fact had a slightly different power supply to the 2 and the 2X. Even though they're all compatible with each other, the power supply that came as standard with the 2FX had a variable speed fan to help control noise and improve cooling. So, interesting point to note, but you can use a power supply from either a 2 or a 2X with a 2FX quite safely. They're all rated at the same output and they all have the same connector. Next thing we'll do is we'll unhook the hard drive and the floppy drives. So we'll unplug these cables here, move them out of the way. Now we have the drive carrier plate that the hard drive and floppy drive sit on. To take it out, we have 4 screws, 2 up the back and 2 up the front. Now the screws are out, we can lift the carrier straight out of the system. So there's the hard drive and floppy drive carrier. Put that over here. Now we'll take these other cables out of the system, just undo the clips there, power supply and data cable for the hard disk and the floppy drive cables as well. Note that on the 2FX, the floppy cables actually have locking connectors on them, so you have to move these little tabs, the black tabs, out in order to pull the connectors free. So put that over here. The next step is the logic board. So to take it out, very much like the 2 or the 2X, there are 2 screws to take out, here and here. We have the speaker to unplug, and now, by applying very gentle upward pressure on the board, we can start popping or moving these little plastic tabs back to start releasing the board. So you just have to be very careful as you do this. Don't want to apply too much stress to the board. But as you pop each one up, the board will start to become free. There we go. Getting there. Oop. Nearly. That's it. Now the board is free, so we can pull it back and lift it straight out. So there is the logic board from the 2FX that we'll look at in a moment. To take the speaker out, just push on the little plastic tabs that hold it in place, push them away, and the speaker comes out. And then finally we have the insulating sheet from the bottom of the case. Just pull up on that to take it out. And there you have it. So now the 2FX is completely disassembled. So what we'll do now is we'll have a closer look at the various parts that we just took out. Okay, here is the logic board from the Macintosh IIfx. So let's have a closer look at it. So starting from the top, we have the board's identification label up here, Apple Computer 1990, Macintosh IIfx, and we also have all the names of all the various people who designed the system. So that's quite neat. Over here we have the power connector for the hard disk. We have the SCSI connector for it up here. The SCSI controller is over here. Also supports DMA, so it makes it a very fast SCSI controller. We've got the floppy controller over here. And then we have the serial controller over here. But notice that both the serial controller and the floppy controller have one of these chips alongside them. This one and this one. And these are in fact embedded CPUs. Because to improve performance, one of the other features the IIfx had was it had these 2 special embedded microcontrollers with embedded CPUs in them to offload the work that would have been done by the main CPU when handling either serial or floppy drive access. Unfortunately though, the system software for the Mac was never actually updated to take advantage of that. So it was a good idea, but it never actually saw any benefit in the real world. Then over here we have the two batteries for the system. And if you've watched my video on the Macintosh 2, you'll remember that the 2X and 2FX all require two functioning PRAM batteries in order to boot. And that's because the power supply does not generate any standby power itself to power up the logic board when the machine is switched off. Instead, what these models do is that they rely on the onboard batteries to keep that circuitry powered up so that when you push the power switch, the system will start up. But one improvement over the Macintosh 2 was that on the late model 2Xs and all the 2FXs, they went to battery holders rather than having the batteries soldered directly to the logic board. So we have the two 3.6 volt lithium batteries there. Reset interrupt switches over here. Various other controllers here. And moving over from there, we have the 6 NuBus expansion slots over here. Various other controllers over here. And here we have the memory. Now, as I mentioned, the 2FX uses a very special type of memory. It actually uses special 64-pin SIM modules, which are unique to this model. So finding memory for the 2FX these days can be a little tricky. But the reason this was done is in the name of performance. The 2FX had a feature called latched read and write. And what that meant basically is that the read and write cycles to the system memory could overlap slightly, thus improving performance. But it did require a special type of memory in order to implement that, and that's why Apple chose to do it this way. So we have 8 1 megabyte SIMs here for a total of 8 megabytes of onboard memory. So moving on from there, what else have we got? Not much there. We've got the 68882 numeric coprocessor here running at 40 megahertz. Then over here we have this white slot is in fact a 2FX processor direct slot. But unfortunately this PDS was specific to the 2FX, and as a result there weren't many cards made for it. There were a couple of CPU accelerators you could buy to upgrade your 2FX to an 040 CPU. But other than that, there wasn't much around for it, so it's not really that useful. We've got the floppy connectors here. Just like the 2 and the 2X, the 2FX can support dual floppy drives. And then, what else do we have? We've got the sound chips here, the power supply connector down here, and down at the bottom here we have the 32 kilobytes of cache memory, and above that we have the ROM SIM. Because unlike the Macintosh 2, which had its ROM chips socketed on the logic board, both the 2X and the 2FX had them on a special SIM module, which made upgrades very easy. So let me just remove that so you can see what it looks like. So that is the ROM SIM there. So it's nothing more, in fact, than 4 ROM chips on a SIM module. We have some other chips here. We have the 80 megahertz clock focus, the 80 megahertz clock crystal here for the main CPU, and the main CPU itself is right here. So this is the Motorola 68030 CPU running at 40 megahertz. So quite fast for its day. And other than that, we've just got various other components on here, nothing really worth talking about. So there we have it. That's the logic board from the Macintosh IIfx. So what we'll do now is we'll have a quick look at the video card that came with it as standard, and that is the Apple 824 GC. So put you over there. Oh, get that out of here. Okay, here is the video card. So this is known as the Apple 824 GC, and it was the first accelerated video card that Apple released, and it was released specifically for the 2FX. But having said that, it is a standard NuBus card, so it can work in any system with a NuBus slot. So what we've got over here is the onboard video RAM. I believe this has, I think it's 512K on board. I'd have to check that, I think. But you can expand it with these two VRAM SIM slots down here. We have the main controller over here. And then over here we have the RAM DAC, the Brooktree RAM DAC, digital to analog converter. We have the ROM chip up here. And we have the NuBus connector down here. And the monitor connector is over here, and it's the standard 15-pin connector that all Mac monitors used at the time. So, quite simple. And if you watch my video on the Macintosh 2, you'll notice that the card is far more integrated and has far fewer components on it than the old Macintosh 2 Toby video card. I should also mention that down here we have the information there. Macintosh display card, copyright 89, 1990, assembled in USA. So that's the video card out of the 2FX. So now we'll have a quick look at the drive cage. Not much to really talk about here. It's actually the same unit essentially as what we had in the 2 and the 2X, but we have the two 1.4 megabyte SuperDrives sitting over here, and then we have the hard disk. Now, because the Macintosh 2 was originally designed for a 5.25 inch form factor hard disk, in fact, if you watch my Macintosh 2 video, you'll see that hard disk in action, you had to use a special bracket to fit a 3.5 inch drive onto the drive carrier. You can see we have that bracket here. And the drive in question is actually a quantum, I believe it's a quantum, I might take that off and have a look at that. Let me take that off and we'll have a closer look at the hard disk. Here's the hard disk out of the Macintosh 2FX that I finally got out of the cradle here. So having a look at it, it is a Quantum ProDrive ELS, and it is an original Apple 80 megabyte unit. Although I don't think this was the original drive that came with the 2FX, because if you look at the ROM chip here, you can see that it's copyright 1992. So this drive was probably not the original one, but it's certainly, oh, there we go, copyright 1992. Focus. So, having said that, this is the drive that we're using in this case. So, what we'll do now is, I'll reassemble the 2FX, and in the next video, we'll power it up and demonstrate some software. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for part 2.